have you with us. Today's lesson is going to be taken, I think, yes, from Isaiah 53. And if you might want to look at it there, we're going to read it here in just a minute. We just read 1 Peter 2, and we're going to read Isaiah 53, a passage that most of you should be very familiar with as you think about this. Who hath believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall go up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he hath poured out his soul unto death. And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Isaiah 53 was written hundreds of years before the death of Christ. But as you surely can tell from the reading, it so very accurately presents his death, numbered with transgressors, with a rich man in his death in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Over and over throughout it, it describes the death of Jesus. As you think about it, you want to think about the first few verses there, where he says he grew up before him as a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. As you think about this, you might notice several passages. Look with me at John 12 and verse 38. So that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled, Lord, who has believed what he heard from us? and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? That's the first verse of this chapter, Isaiah 53. You might want to think about that as you might look at several other passages along the way. You might see also in Romans 10 and verse 16 that the same passage is being used. They were very, very acutely aware of this passage in Isaiah. Romans 10 and verse 16 says, "But they have not all obeyed the gospel, for Isaiah saith, Lord, who hath believed our report?" Same passage, verse 1 of this chapter. Oh, my goodness. I've been poking too many buttons. I don't want you all to get ahead of me. An interesting passage. He grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. You know, a tree, when it's cut off, will oftentimes regrow from the stump, especially in dry ground. For the stump of the plant has sent down roots deep in the earth, down where the moisture exists during a drought. And he was like a root growing out of a dry ground. This illustration is used many times in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. Hebrews 11, for instance, and this is just one of the times that it's used in Isaiah. Isaiah 11 and verse 1, "There shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord." And read on in that chapter and you'll find its messianic prediction. You know, there's a lot of people who argue that the Bible, the Old Testament, was not really predictive. But here's Isaiah 53, here's Isaiah 11, and many other passages that clearly are written very specifically about Jesus before he ever came into existence. You might notice John 1:11 and see what it's talking about. He's a root out of dry ground. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. You might notice again in Job, the 14th chapter and verse 7, "For there is hope for a tree, if it be cut down, that it'll sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though its root grow old in the earth, and its stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud and put out branches like a young plant." He was like a root out of a dry ground. The eye, the depraved eye, he says, he has no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. As you think about what do you think about the depraved eye? The eye that can't see reality, that only looks for the superficial. He had no beauty. You know, some men and some women are beautiful and are handsome and beautiful, and they draw our attention. They have a tremendous figure, a presence. Jesus didn't have that. There was nothing superficial about him. You know, you see so many pictures of him that have that halo over his head. There was nothing superficial about him that would draw you to look at him over the next man, the next ordinary man next to him. So the eye only admires what the heart loves. And as we look at him, it says there's no beauty that we should desire him. Their eyes, when Jesus came, were superficial and carnal. They expected a prince, They expected a general. They expected a great leader of mankind, surrounded by pomp and dignity and with a carriage and bearing of power. And he didn't have that. He was despised. In 2 Peter 2 and verse 14, he speaks of others having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and a heart they have exercised with covetous practices. Cursed children, having eyes full, the depraved eye, the eye that does not see reality. Look in Acts 28, and here it's spoken of again. Verse 25, when they had agreed not among themselves, they departed. After that Paul had spoken to them one word. Well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah the prophet unto our fathers, saying, Go unto this people and say, Hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see and not perceive. For the heart of this people is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes have they closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Be it known therefore unto you that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. They didn't listen to what he said. They didn't see the heart. They only looked at the superficial, and that wasn't working. The world today hasn't altered its taste. You need to understand that. It hasn't altered. He was hated for what he was, the son of a carpenter. He was hated for that. How could the son of a carpenter amount to anything? How could this be privilege and joy? And for what he wasn't. He wasn't majestic. He wasn't obvious. He wasn't charismatic. You know, you look at some of these movie stars and wow, men and women, whoo-wee. I'd want to talk to them. I'd want to listen to them. And some of these politicians, now some of them politicians are not that good looking, but some of them are handsome fellows. You'd want to hear every word that drops out of their mouth. Some preachers, I've seen many brethren who would brag on a preacher because he was tall. Okay. Or brag on a preacher because he had a deep voice. So does my donkey. But those are superficial judgments. And that was why they hated Jesus. They couldn't stand what he was, the son of a carpenter, and who he wasn't. He wasn't majestic. Now then, the warning for us is that the taste of the world hasn't changed. It's going to be the same way for you and me. Look in John 15, verse 18 through 20. Excuse me, I can put it up here. John 15, verse 18. If the world hates you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. If ye were of the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they'll keep yours also. Ladies and gentlemen, what are we? We're not the biggest congregation of people in town. We don't have the handsomest preacher in the world. None of us is particularly glamorous or vastly wealthy. I don't think anybody drove a fancy car out there. You're just a bunch of ordinary cars. Some good, some bad. Some making a lot of noise when they drive in, and some are fairly quiet. But there's nothing impressive about it. We're just ordinary folks. Some of us went to college, some didn't. Most of us are just ordinary laborers, housewives. The world looks down on us. In worldly sense, we're not very impressive. But you have the one thing the world needs. You have the gospel. You have salvation. You have forgiveness of sins. And you can tell people about that. It wasn't because Jesus was beautiful and their eyes couldn't see it. But as well, you might look at the sources of the sorrow of Jesus. Have you ever thought about them? Isaiah 53 verse 3 says, "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not." You know, you and I, we read that and we think, well, that's talking about the crucifixion. Okay. But there's a whole lot more than that. There was the failure on the part of his friends, his disciples, to understand him. You know, you read through that and over again, they just don't get it. They don't understand it. And several times as they wrote about it after the fact, they say that. They say, well, we didn't understand this till he died and was raised. We just didn't understand it. And so think about your life's work and nobody gets it. Just nobody gets it. Nobody understands it. Nobody responds really to it. They're all still trying to take him and by force and making him a king. Wednesday night we were studying about two of them, James and John, and their mother, who said, hey, we want to be on the right and left of your kingdom. And Jesus said, are you able to drink of the cup that I'm going to drink? And be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? Referring to his death. They just didn't get it. That's a hard thing to do, to go through your life and nobody gets it. Look at John 16 and verse 32. Behold, the hour cometh, yea, is now come. Jesus predicted this. That ye shall be scattered, every man to his own, and shall leave me alone. And yet I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. They were all going to desert him. They were going to deny him. Peter was going to be out there in the garden, or out there at the fire, denying him to the point of cursing 3 times. And he and John were at least brave enough to sort of get within eyesight of the Lord. Another of his disciples betrayed him. The rest all deserted him. So yes, his friends didn't get it and were terrified. The malignity of his enemies as you study through his life, they hated him. They hated him over and over and over again, even though they had seen the wonderful things he had done. There's a sorrow in that. You know, when everybody hates you, nobody speaks well of you or loves you, it can get you down, can't it? The man of sorrows. He's rejected by people that the people refused to understand. They just didn't get it. He witnessed the presence of what you and I are going through, our suffering, how we're abused by those who lead us, used by them, how we can't escape the consequences of our sins, how terrible that is, how we grieve over death and sickness and sorrow, how our families oftentimes fall apart. He saw all that and witnessed the sorrow of the world. That can get you down a while. You know, we've got a member or two here that have been policemen. And that can be hard. When all through your life, all through your working life at least, you get to see the worst of the worst. You get to see people on their worst day. You get to see them in a day they'd like to forget. That can be hard. It can be very hard. Jesus saw us that way. And then there was that deep sense of our sins and how they were inescapable. How we sinned and we thought it would be, you know, talks about, Hebrews talks about the pleasures of sin for a season. It seemed wonderful. But then as we look back on it, we realize what it's done to us. We've lost our wife. We've lost our children. We've lost our health. We've lost our reputation. We've lost our own image of what we are. Jesus witnessed that, what it was doing to us. There's a sorrow when you see that for other people. Every now and then somebody will come to me and they'll be in terrible grief because of their sins. And it's sad. And I tell them, hey, you can be forgiven. You can be forgiven. You can have a happier outcome of life. And that's what drove Jesus on to the cross, is that he could help us. He could relieve us all. There were springs of joy in his life. I'm sure he laughed. He did. The Bible talks about it. He had the communion with the Father. He spoke to him often. Do you? You know, I was thinking the other night as I prayed that one of these days somebody's going to make fun of me because I'm going to say, well, I converse with God quite often. And they're going to sarcastically respond to me, well, what does he say? I said, well, he doesn't say anything. But then I thought, you know, he really doesn't need to. He said it all. It's just me wanting to talk to him. I know what he said. I know what he promised. But I have concerns about my family. I've got concerns about my brethren, concerns about my sins, my faithfulness, concerns about my country. And I'm very grateful to him. So it's a pleasure to be able to commune with the Father. He had a sincere attachment with the disciples. They were friends. Even though they were imperfect and didn't get him, he had friends. He had the gratitude of those that he healed and saved from their sins. He had the consciousness of faithful fulfillment of his mission. He had the calm assurance, and this is important, of victory. You know, when Thessalonians says that we sorrow not as other men who have no hope, why is that? Why is that you and I are able to go to the cemetery or to the funeral home or to the hospital in the face of death and be calm? I think it's because we're assured of a victory. The rest of the world doesn't have that assurance. Jesus had it. He knew what he was going to do, and he knew what he was going to succeed at. Look in John 12, verse 24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a grain of wheat fall into the earth and die, it abideth by itself alone. But if it die, it beareth much fruit. He that loveth his life loseth it. He that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. Now is my soul troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, he said, looking toward his death. But for this cause came I unto this hour. Father, glorify thy name. There came therefore a voice out of heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. The multitude therefore that stood by and heard it said that it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus answered and said, this voice hath not come for my sake, but for your sakes. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto myself. There was a joy in that. That's what kept him going. But another passage I wanted you to notice is in verse 7. It says, he was oppressed, yet when he was afflicted, he opened not his mouth. As a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and as a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. I want you to think about silence. So many times, a disagreement elevates into an argument. Not necessarily violence, but yelling and hollering and raising your voice and intemperance. But the Lord knew the value of silence. When it talked about the lamb dumb before his shearers, as a lamb led to the slaughter, and as a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. The lamb feels safe in the arms of the shearers. At his trials, Jesus spoke only a very few phrases. You might notice in a couple of places. Matthew 27, verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, art thou the king of the Jews? Jesus said unto him, Thou sayest. When he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then saith Pilate unto him, Hearest thou not how many things they witness against thee? He gave him no answer, not even to one word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. In Luke 23 and verse 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad, for he was of a long time desirous to see him, because he had heard concerning him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. And he questioned him in many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood vehemently accusing him. He didn't talk. The Lord quite simply had command of himself. You know, when that disagreement dissolves into intemperate words and shouting and colorful language, we lose control. We lose control. We no longer can command ourselves. His silence was convincing or aggravating. He didn't intend to bandy words back and forth. When a man's work is to endure, there really isn't any need of speech. Jesus knew what he was going to do. He knew what the Jews were going to do to him. He knew that Pilate was a man of indecision, and there wasn't any point in talking anymore. He was going to let his actions suffice without a lot of words about it. Suffering has its own voice. He would suffer the abuse. He would take the crown of thorns. He'd take the lashings, the mockings, and he would go to the cross. And that was speaking far louder than anything he could say. His active work was done. And on the cross, he said, finally, it's finished. When there is no point in speech, his work was best done in silence. He bore reproach and convictions, his false conviction and his humiliation in silence. Now then, this morning, how do we apply this to ourselves? How is it applied in the Bible? Were the apostles aware of these passages? Did they know what they applied to? Why was he humiliated? Isn't that a question? Why? Jesus, why did he go through the cross? Why did he go through the beatings and all the abuse and the mockery? Why? Haven't you asked that? Doesn't make a lick of sense to me. He's the Son of God. Surely there was some other way. Did you know that in Isaiah 53, 12 times, that's two more than I can hold up right now, 12 times, in 9 verses, God sets forth that Jesus' suffering was for us. It was vicarious. 12 times in 9 verses he said that. It's for you. It's for me. It wasn't for him. You know, we're so used to people acting selfishly. And here God was, the Son of God was, not selfish. He did it for us. 12 times in 9 verses. In Acts 8, in verse 30, they were having the same problem with Isaiah 53 we were. You remember this passage over here in Acts 8, verse 26? The angel of the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, Arise, go toward the south unto the way that goeth down from Jerusalem to Gaza, which is desert. He arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem to worship, was returning, and sitting in his chariot read Isaiah the prophet. Then the Spirit said unto Philip, Go near and join thyself to this chariot. Philip ran thither to him and heard him read the prophet Isaiah, and said, Understandest thou what thou readest? You might do that sometime. Sometime at lunch where you work or whatever, you see somebody reading the Bible. Why don't you say, Hey, why don't you tell me about what you're reading? And maybe you can just sit and talk about it or just listen. He said, How can I, except some man guide me? And he desired Philip that he would come up and sit with him. And the place he was reading was Isaiah 53. And is it any wonder that this Jewish materialistic person couldn't understand it? Because of who Jesus was and wasn't. The place of the scripture which he read was this: He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and like a lamb dumb before his shearer, so opened he not his mouth. In his humiliation his judgment was taken away. And who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. And the eunuch answered Philip and said, I pray thee, of whom speaketh the prophet this? Of himself or of some other man? What in the world? He said, I don't understand this passage. He had gone to Jerusalem. He had probably just bought this scroll at an incredible price. What would have been to us thousands of dollars. A handwritten scroll on parchment, on the skin of an animal, sewn together. And he was reading it and he didn't understand it. Would you have? That's what that passage says. He had no form or majesty that we should behold him. Our eye couldn't see it. His eye couldn't see it. So what did the Philip, the evangelist, do? Philip opened his mouth and began at the same scripture and preached unto him Jesus. And as they went on their way, they came to a certain water. And the eunuch said, See, here's water. What doth hinder me to be baptized? How in the world did he learn about baptism? How in the world did he learn that he needed to be baptized? How in the world did he learn that it was fairly urgent, that he needed to do it right away while he's on his trip, in front of his attendants, in front of this stranger? How did he learn that? Why did he learn that they needed to go down into the water and come up out of the water? Where did he get all that? Isaiah 53. Because 12 times in 9 verses, it tells us that Jesus died for us. He died for the Ethiopian eunuch, and he died for you. He died for me. And the Ethiopian realizes this is what needs to be done, because in the process of preaching about Jesus, he learned it. He learned all that about the necessity of baptism. And Philip said, If thou believest with all thine heart, thou mayest. So he learned that it had to come from his heart. It wasn't superficial. He learned it was necessary for him to believe that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. He learned all that because Philip preached to him. And he answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Now, you know, some of you folks have been hearing me preach, goodness knows, many years. And you hadn't made up your mind yet. This guy made up his mind in one trip, and not all of the trip. In what had to have been just a couple of hours as he traveled. I don't know how fast they were driving the horses on that chariot, but I don't think he traveled more than 10 miles before he made the decision, I need to be baptized, and learned it from Isaiah 53, starting there, and learning about who Jesus was. He answered and said, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And he commanded the chariot to stand still, and they went down both into the water, and both Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more, and he wasn't confused anymore. He didn't wonder anymore. He really wasn't, the man was a eunuch. He hadn't been allowed to go to Jerusalem into the temple. He had been condemned because he was a eunuch. He could only get close. But now, he was part of the temple of God. Now, he could speak directly to the Lord through Jesus Christ. Now, he was a priest himself. Now he was one of the children of God. Now he was a descendant of Abraham. And he went on his way rejoicing. What about you? You've heard a whole lot more than this man has ever heard. And he became a Christian. Why don't you come? Jesus died for you. You need to receive him in baptism, having believed. Come while we stand and sing.